All right, so I got a bunch of different updates here that I want to get to with you guys on Israel and Gaza. I want to start off with Genocide Joe over here giving a speech at a church in Charleston, South Carolina, where he was interrupted by some protesters who are not happy with his handling so far. So let's go ahead and watch some of this.
If you really care about the lives lost here, you should honor the lives lost and call for a ceasefire in Palestine.
Ceasefire now! Ceasefire now! Ceasefire now!
That's all right. That's all right. That's all right. That's all right.
Ceasefire now! Ceasefire now! Ceasefire now! Ceasefire now! Ceasefire now! Ceasefire now! Ceasefire now!
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Look, folks, I understand their passion, and I've been quietly working with the Israeli government to get them to reduce and significantly get out of Gaza. I'm using all that I can to do.
Okay, so a couple of different things on that. First off, you could tell people in the crowd were obviously not happy with these protesters, right? I mean, there was this one woman who was sitting over here who was pointing a finger and, scolding them or whatever the case may be. People chanting 4 more years, 4 more years, which is pretty bizarre. Like, if it had been, some Trump protester or something that was standing up and heckling Biden and then you chant 4 more years, okay, that would be one thing. But when it's people who are calling you out for aiding and abetting in a genocidal campaign in Gaza that has killed over 11,000 children so far, over 30,000 people so far, with our weapons that you are choosing to send over to them. Not just sending over there, but skirting around Congress and using your executive authority to force some of these weapons over there that are being dropped on the heads of innocent men, women, and children, to then turn around and chant 4 more years, 4 more years, in response to that, as if it's a ridiculous thing to protest or to be upset about, is pretty disgusting, right? Now, the other part is that Joe Biden's response here, I've been quietly working behind the scenes. I mean, we've been hearing this bullshit since October 7th. It's been, a weekly or in sometimes even a daily thing where Biden or representatives of the Biden administration, they come out, they insist, we're working behind the scenes, right? What exactly have you been working on? What has your quiet working behind the scenes tactic, while simultaneously having absolutely no strings attached whatsoever for the weapons you're sending over to Israel, or your diplomatic support, no strings attached, no conditions, no red lines, as John Kirby said. What exactly are you doing, and what is the manifest way that that is taking place on the ground that is to the benefit of the civilians in Gaza? Because what it looks like, and what in reality it is that you haven't been doing shit. I mean, you can finger wag behind the scenes to Netanyahu, and then turn around and he's giving you a double middle finger to the back and continuing to do whatever the fuck he wants. The reality is you are not using any of the levers that you have at your disposal to actually wield power to influence what Israel is doing, okay? If you called Bibi up on the phone and threatened to withdraw all of the aid that we are giving them, to stop sending weapons, then the war could stop tomorrow. It's not just a theory here. We've seen this with previous presidents, right? With Bush and with Reagan, we've seen this over and over and over again. With Reagan, it literally took one phone call, and within minutes, they stopped their offensive. One phone call. That's the kind of power that Joe Biden has, but he's not willing to engage in that. He just wants to pretend as if he's doing something behind the scenes when he's not, and when Israel is, if anything, continuing to ramp up their offensive and their slaughter of innocent civilians. And it's not even just that he's not doing what he can in order to stop this, but he's also complicit. And I don't mean just complicit in like a moral sense, which he is, and not even also just in a, according to international law with this genocide case that's being brought by South Africa at the International Court of Justice. He could also be held accountable for being complicit in genocide under international law. But even beyond that, he's also complicit in the sense of This is illegal, what we are doing right now. It is illegal under U.S. law to send weapons, to give weapons, to sell weapons to a country that is using those weapons in violation of international law. It's called the Leahy Act, okay? And we're just completely acting as if that law doesn't exist. Or worse than that, as I'll get to here in a second, the Joe Biden administration is refusing to even do a formal assessment as to whether or not Israel is following in accordance with international law because they know the answer. And so now I want to move on to this because we also have some internal pressure, not just protesters out in the streets or confronting Biden directly. Also within his administration, there's been significant pushback, both from his staff as well as from, anonymous internal, State Department officials who have spoken to the media that I'll show you here in a minute. But I mean, here from Politico, Biden campaign staff issues anonymous letter protesting approach to Israel-Hamas war. The letter says that it is a moral imperative for the president to publicly call for a cessation of violence. So good for them for doing this. I kind of in a way understand why they're being anonymous. They don't want to lose their jobs at some point. I do have respect for a lot of people who have resigned from the Biden administration publicly and have explained why in great detail. But I mean, this is just another example of how the pressure isn't just some radical lefties on Twitter. Okay, it's hundreds of thousands of people who have taken to the streets over the last couple of months, if not millions. It is people within his own staff. It is people within his own inner circle, many of whom are too scared to come out and say anything about it publicly. But the pressure is mounting. I mean, even some of his closest allies realize that this is an absolute unmitigated disaster for numerous different reasons. Politically, it's a disaster, which is almost the most ironic part about all of this, is that this isn't even something that's going to help you politically for the election that's coming up. If anything, you're destroying your base of supporters that won you the last election, who are leaving you in flocks, right? So it doesn't help you politically. You're also risking this escalating significantly into a broader war in the region with Hezbollah, with the Houthis, with Iran, etc., etc. So you're risking that, drawing us into another disastrous Middle Eastern war. And then on top of that, obviously, you have the humanitarian aspect of all of this. So this doesn't make sense from any perspective you want to look at it. But Biden is just moving full speed ahead. And I also wanted to point this out, just in terms of some of the latest humanitarian things that I've seen. From Kenneth Roth, one of the former leaders of Human Rights Watch. Death in Gaza by Israeli bureaucracy. During the process for inspecting humanitarian aid, if Israeli inspectors reject even a single item in a truck, it must return with its entire cargo to be repackaged, starting with the weeks-long process all over again. And if you think that, they spot a weapon or a bomb in one of these trucks, and that's why they're turning it around for security reasons, no, of course not. They're being incredibly cumbersome, as they point out here, and arbitrary in how they are deciding what can and can't get into Gaza. And the result of that is exactly what we've seen. I mean, thousands of people, every time one of these aid trucks does manage to get into Gaza, which there haven't been nearly enough, obviously, you have people who just swarm the truck because they're so desperate for food. There's a lack of food, of clean drinking water, of medical supplies, of everything that they need to be able to survive. And of course, that ties in with the increased likelihood for outbreaks of disease. We've seen significant upticks in disease as people are crammed into these refugee camps, these makeshift tents, right? So you have the increased aspect of disease, and now you have the increased aspect of literal starvation to death, right? Hundreds of thousands of people, according to UN reports, are at risk of starvation over the next 6 months to a year if we continue on the current trajectory. So Biden pretending like, I'm working behind the scenes, we're getting more aid in, right? We're working with Israel closely to avoid civilian casualties. What are you talking about? It's not an issue of them accidentally killing too many civilians or accidentally not allowing enough aid in. That's part of the strategy. And if it's part of the strategy, they're not going to work alongside you behind the scenes to ameliorate that. Okay? This situation is getting worse because Israel wants it to get worse. It's part of the strategy. Also here, from Kenneth Roth. This is not winding things down. 73 Palestinians have been killed and 99 wounded in attacks over just the past 24 hours. 24 hours, 73 killed, 99 wounded. We also have this story, which really just sums everything up. More than 10 children losing legs in Gaza every day as dire health crisis grows. 10 children losing legs every single day. Many of them are having their limbs amputated without anesthesia. And I can't even begin to tell you guys the horror stories that I've seen from situations like this, where a doctor is having to perform an amputation on a child who is screaming, writhing in pain, as their family is having to stand around and watch. Because there's no anesthesia. Why is there no anesthesia? Because Israel will not allow it. Because of the blockade. So, I mean, does it get more disgusting than this? Also, shout out to CNN here for using another, passive voice headline. I wonder if this one went through the IDF censor, right? Losing legs. How are they losing the legs? I mean, I went through and I read this entire article to make sure that I wasn't misinterpreting it. There is literally only one mention in this entire article of Israel, and it's down here. The IDF has repeatedly said it's not targeting civilians. Good job, CNN. This is real journalism. Great job, guys. You're talking about a story in which children are losing their legs, 10 a day, because of Israeli strikes, targeting them, many of them in safe zones that Israel told them to go to, and you're reporting on it as if it's just magically happening. Limbs are just falling off. Who knows what the cause was? Oh, and by the way, the only time we're going to mention Israel in the entire fucking article is to say that they deny targeting civilians. You don't have to even just look at what's happening on the ground to understand that they're targeting civilians. You can take their own statements, right? How many statements have I covered? And I'm going to have another video out later today on this. How many statements have I covered from Israeli representatives, high-level government officials, members of the Knesset, members of the Israeli media, specifically saying that they're targeting civilians, that there's no such thing as an innocent civilian in Gaza? It's so clear at this point. Another point backing that up. So, two different things here from Bronco. All U.S. war games show an Israeli-Lebanon war, which it seems like they want us to get into because, the longer this war goes on, the longer Netanyahu can keep himself in power. But all U.S. war games show an Israeli-Lebanon war escalating into something terrible, but the Biden White House is still not considering putting conditions on arms transfers to Israel. One U.S. official says that the problem is that nobody can rein in Biden. So again, even some of the people around him, right? The president's entire Middle East approach is being guided by the White House, and in many sense, the president himself, defying the recommendations of policy experts. So even some of the people in his inner circle, the people surrounding his administration, they're struggling to rein Biden in. So he is, in a more singular way than even I thought, responsible for all of this. I don't know what the fuck it is. I don't know if it's his personal attachment to Israel. He has always been, a super pro-Israel hawk ever since he was in the Senate. I don't know if it's like his personal ties to Zionism, belief in this settler colonial project, or if he thinks it's in the U.S. geopolitical interest, which I don't know how the fuck you could possibly think that given the trajectory we're on. But whatever the case is, he is firmly a believer in what Israel is doing right now. We also had this, evidently worried about a judgment on the merits of that South Africa genocide case that's being brought against Israel. They're pressing other countries, to denounce the case in the hope of persuading the International Court of Justice to decide based on politics rather than facts, right? Now, I read South Africa's genocide case. You should go and look it up and read the entire thing. Convincing would be downplaying it to an absurd degree, right? It is very explicit at this point. And I went over the pages of the statements from Israeli politicians that pretty much lay out the intent part of the genocide very clearly. But Israel is now nervous about this, and I think they're going to lose this case. Now, what comes after that, what kind of consequences are going to come after that, is another longer conversation that I could talk about in a different video. But this is serious, and obviously Israel is worried about it. This could have legitimate consequences for them. And so now I want to talk about this. So the Biden White House, not just Biden himself, all of these representatives I've been talking about, right? John Kirby, the rest of them, okay, Matthew Miller, they continue to downplay what Israel is doing right now, to insist that they are following in accordance with international law. They're not committing war crimes. The idea that they're committing a genocide or that they have genocidal intent, totally preposterous, right? And so I have a couple comparisons here, and then we'll get to that thing I mentioned earlier. But here's the comparison with Russia, right? It took them less than a month, or around a month, after Russia invaded Ukraine, to come out and make statements saying that Russia is committing war crimes in Ukraine. About a month it took them. We're now several months into this offensive into Gaza. Even the disparity between Russian war crimes in Ukraine and Israeli war crimes in Gaza is not even comparable in terms of the speed, the scale, the rate, the intensity. It's not comparable at all. And yet when it's Russia, we're going to participate with the international community on making sure we can document the evidence on Russian atrocities. On South Africa's case, he says meritless, counterproductive, completely without any basis in fact whatsoever. Really? Did you read the report? Have you been listening to the Israeli media? Have you seen the videos of IDF soldiers on the ground? it doesn't even engage with any debate on the actual merits of the case, just calls it meritless. Based on what? Based on what exactly? That you're a supporter of Israel? Maybe he wants to call it counterproductive and meritless and completely without fact, because maybe he knows in the back of his mind that if it is found to be meritful or whatever the word would be, and productive and based in fact, then he would be complicit as well. And so would Joe Biden. And so would the rest of them who have been aiding and abetting in this process. Another one here. We have not seen anything that would convince us that we need to take a different approach in terms of trying to help Israel defend itself. I mean, it's a full endorsement of everything Israel is doing. Now, it's also a weird contradiction here because I've seen other statements where guys like Kirby will come out and they'll say, well, we think there have been too many civilian deaths. Okay, so then which one is it? Because you can't say there have been too many civilian deaths and then simultaneously say Israel is following in perfect accordance with international law. One of those is not matching up with the other one there, right? But we haven't seen anything that would convince us that we need to take a different approach in terms of helping Israel defend itself. So the question is obviously, then what would it take? What would it take? 200,000 dead Palestinians? What would it take? 500,000, a million? Do they have to literally push every Palestinian in Gaza into the sea for you to then recognize it as an ethnic cleansing, as a genocidal campaign? Do they have to bomb every single mosque in Gaza? Every single hospital in Gaza? Do they have to kill every single one of the 1,000 journalists in Gaza? What exactly are the metrics that would have to be met? I mean, do they have to kill 100% civilians instead of 90% civilians? What specifically are you looking for? And the answer for that is that they're not looking for anything. Intentionally. So here from Political, U.S. hasn't formally assessed if Israel is violating human rights. They have not assessed it. They have not done a formal assessment as to whether or not this country that we are sending millions, billions of dollars in aid and weaponry to, that has killed, over 11,000 children so far, 10 children losing limbs every single day. We're not doing a formal assessment on whether or not they're even violating international law. I mean, how insane does this have to be? Now, the obvious reality of this is that the reason they're not looking into this is because they know the answer. They know that if they did a formal assessment, it would find that Israel is not following in accordance with international human rights laws, and therefore they would be, number one, complicit in those human rights violations, and number two, would also, again, be violating U.S. law that says that you cannot sell or give weapons to a country that is using them to commit war crimes. That's against the law. It is illegal. So they're intentionally not looking into it. And then to turn around and to say, but at the same time as we're not looking into it, we're 100% certain that the South Africa case is meritless, totally counterproductive, based no basis in fact whatsoever, even though we're not actually looking to see. I mean, they're spitting in our faces with how stupid and ridiculous this is. Another one here that was pretty disgusting to me. Anthony Blinken recently did a trip over in Doha. And so I talked about yesterday, Wael Dadou, who works for Al Jazeera, journalist who's been doing fantastic work, has lost numerous family members as a result of targeted Israeli strikes. Just recently lost his son, Hamza, okay? And this is the response from Blinken, right? Now, keep in mind, they've killed over 100 journalists. This has been the deadliest war for journalists in modern history around the world. I saw one estimate that said in 2022, you could take all of the conflicts from around the entirety of the planet and add up all of the journalists that have been killed in all these various wars around the world. And it was like 60 to 70 people who had been killed as a journalist. Israel's killed over 100. At this point, it's over 110. So they're targeting these journalists, which they've done in the past, like with Shireen Abu Akleh, but they're targeting these journalists, and this is his response. Deeply, deeply sorry for the almost unimaginable loss of your colleague, Wael. I am a parent myself. I can't begin to imagine the horror that he has experienced, not once, but now twice. This is an unimaginable tragedy. It's not a tragedy. It's a crime that you are complicit in. I mean, to even bring up his name to me, is disgusting. I don't know if some people would interpret this as a nice gesture or something. To me, it's fucking abhorrent to mention this man's name as you are actively giving the weapons to the country that is massacring his family for the crime of reporting on what is happening in Gaza. And we pretend like we believe in a free press, right? Or that Israel believes in the free press and democratic values. I mean, it's like if I was an arms dealer, right? If I had a couple of guns on me and some ammunition, and somebody comes up to me on the street and they say, I'm going to go into that house over there and rob them and murder everybody inside. And I need a gun and I need some ammunition. Will you give that to me? And then I turn around and I say, yeah, I'm going to give you the gun. I'm going to give you the ammunition. But yeah, you really shouldn't go into the house and kill those people, right? And so I give them the gun and the ammunition, and they go and they do exactly what they said they were going to do. And then I show up at their funerals and tell the rest of their family, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry for your tragic loss. I would be arrested. I would be thrown in jail for being complicit in that robbery and that homicide. And in the exact same way, so is Anthony Blinken. So is Joe Biden. So is Matthew Miller, John Kirby, whoever the case may be. I mean, just absolutely insane. Now, on the flip side of that, we have had Bernie Sanders now, and I mentioned this in a previous video, but it's worth bringing up. He's a senator. It's a bigger deal. Coming out against the $10.1 billion in unconditional aid to Israel. So he still hasn't called for a ceasefire. He's kind of been dancing around that terminology for some reason. I honestly don't really know why he's had this sort of view on Israel. Typically, he has been more willing to be critical of Israel. Obviously, there's a ton of pressure surrounding him right now, but at least he's coming out now, finally, way too late, saying, okay, maybe we shouldn't give them an additional $10 billion in aid, right? So we had at least that. I don't know if this is going to be enough to block this, but you had that. Then we also had, on the other flip side, Mike Pence. I mean, signing his name, writing a message on Israeli artillery shells that are, in all likelihood, given the statistics, going to go drop on the heads of children. These are our politicians, folks. Democrat, Republican, doesn't matter. This is the former vice president signing a message on a rocket. A rocket that is going to be fired at civilians. What the fuck are we doing here, man? I mean, it really does, and I've heard other people make this point before. It really does feel like we're living through history right now. Not in the current sense, but like it almost is so absurd and so ridiculous seeing some of the stuff that is being said and done by our representatives, by our countries, United States, Israel, the rest of, Europe, etc., that it's almost like I'm reading a history book, right? It's almost like you're reading something that happened in the past and you're like, how the fuck did these people let this happen? This is monstrous, right? This must be from a different time. No, this is happening right now, right in front of our eyes, right in the open, and they're not even apologetic about it. They don't even hide it. They don't even pretend to cover it up. So, I mean, there are your various different updates from today. Obviously not good news, especially not good news given the escalation trajectory that we are on towards this spiraling into a broader conflict, which I am really worried about. So, on the one hand, it's good that Joe Biden is being confronted. On the other hand, you see the response. Even at his own campaign rally, people start, 4 more years, scolding, yelling at the protesters for daring to be critical of Biden, for supporting a genocide.